At dawn in 13th-century Paris, the smell of bread moved faster than the church bells. Before merchants lifted their shutters, before scholars crowded the streets near the university, ovens were already burning across the city. Fires were lit in the dark, dough was shaped by calloused hands, and loaves slid into stone hearths. Bread was not just food, it was life itself. Every meal, for rich and poor alike, began and ended with it. Paris in the 1200s was one of the largest cities in Europe, crowded, loud, and perpetually hungry. Feeding tens of thousands of mouths each day was a constant struggle, one that shaped daily routines, social divisions, and even the tempo of the city. What you ate, how often you ate, and the color of your bread revealed exactly where you stood in the social order. For the poor, bread dominated existence. Their loaves were dark and coarse, baked from rye, barley, or mixed grains. Wheat bread, lighter, softer, and far more desirable, was expensive and tightly regulated by city authorities. It was often reserved for those who could afford higher prices or had access to privilege. Most poor families bought bread every single day, spending the majority of their income on it. A bad harvest or a rise in grain prices meant immediate suffering. Hunger was never abstract. It was not a distant fear or a seasonal concern. It was constant, it was personal, and it shaped every decision of daily life. Bread was eaten at every meal. Sometimes it was dipped in water or thin wine. Sometimes it was soaked in broth until soft enough to chew. Stale bread was never discarded. Nothing could be wasted. Old loaves were broken apart and stirred into stew or carved into thick slabs known as trenchers, edible plates that absorbed grease and juices. Once saturated, these trenchers might be eaten by servants, shared among family members, or given to the poor. Even in leftovers, bread carried value. Alongside bread came stew. For most Parisians, it was the only hot meal of the day. Stew simmered slowly, often for hours, in communal pots shared by entire households or neighborhoods. Ingredients depended entirely on availability. Cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, beans, and peas formed the backbone of daily nutrition. These vegetables were cheap, filling, and reliable. Meat was uncommon. When it appeared, it was rarely prime cuts. More often it was scraps, bones, rendered fat, or small pieces of salted pork added for flavor rather than substance. Protein was precious. Flavor came not from exotic spices, but from local herbs grown in gardens or gathered from fields. Spices existed, but they were costly imports, reserved for the wealthy. For the poor, meals were simple, repetitive, and dictated by survival. Food was not about pleasure. It was about endurance. Fresh meat was a luxury the poor rarely tasted. When it did appear, it was usually pork, the cheapest and most common animal in medieval Paris. Even then, it was rarely fresh. Pork was salted, smoked, or cured to preserve it, stretching small amounts over long periods. Fish was far more accessible, especially under the strict rules of the church. Religious calendars shaped diets as much as income. Nearly half the year was governed by fasting days when meat was forbidden. On those days, fish filled the gap. Salted herring, dried cod, and eels pulled from the Seine became essential sources of protein. These were not delicacies, they were necessities. Wine, surprisingly, was consumed daily by nearly everyone. Parisian water was unsafe, polluted by waste, runoff, and refuse dumped into the streets and river. Wine, even weak wine diluted with water, was far safer to drink. The poor consumed low-quality wine, thin and often sour, sometimes made from the final pressings of better grapes. Children drank it as well, heavily watered down. Ale existed, but in Paris, wine dominated. Nearby vineyards ensured a steady supply, making it cheaper and more reliable than clean water. It was not indulgence. It was survival. In medieval Paris, what people ate and drank was dictated by necessity, faith, and fear of hunger. Every meal reflected the fragile balance between scarcity and endurance in a city that was always one bad harvest away from crisis. Cheese was one of the most reliable sources of protein for the poor. Hard cheeses kept well, traveled easily, and could be eaten long after fresh dairy spoiled. Milk itself was rarely consumed fresh. It turned quickly and was unsafe without immediate use. Butter, common in Northern Europe, was less prevalent in Paris. Instead, animal fat and lard were the primary cooking fats. Eggs appeared when available, but they were valuable commodities, often sold at market rather than eaten at home. Then there was the other world. For the wealthy, nobles, prosperous merchants, and high clergy, food followed entirely different rules. Their bread was white, soft, and finely sifted. Wheat bread was a visible marker of status, carefully baked and costly. To eat white bread was to display wealth. Meals were not merely nourishment. They were performances. Tables were laden with multiple dishes served in deliberate sequence, far beyond anything the poor could imagine. Meat was abundant and varied. Beef, mutton, veal, pork, and poultry appeared regularly. Game, deer, boar, and wild birds was especially prized, though hunting rights were tightly controlled by law. Meat was roasted on spits, boiled in rich broths, or baked into elaborate pies sealed with thick crusts. These crusts were often discarded, serving more as containers than food. Waste itself became a symbol of abundance. In 13th-century Paris, food drew an unmistakable line between classes. One loaf fed survival, another announced power, and every table, from the humblest hearth to the grandest hall, told the same story of hierarchy, privilege, and a city bound together by hunger, faith, and bread. Spices transformed elite cuisine into spectacle. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger traveled vast distances along dangerous trade routes, each grain worth its weight in silver. To season generously was to proclaim wealth, influence, and access to the wider world. Flavor became a language of power. Sweet and savory were not opposites but companions. Meat might be simmered with honey, dried figs, raisins, and wine, layered with spices that dazzled the senses. These dishes were rich, fragrant, and complex, entirely unlike the simple vegetable stews that sustained the poor. To eat this way was not merely to be fed, but to be impressed. Fish occupied a place of honor at elite tables. Pike, carp, salmon, eel, and the prized lamprey were served fresh, roasted, stewed, or baked into ornate dishes. Religious fast days did not mean restraint for the wealthy. Instead of meat, noble households displayed abundance through lavish fish feasts, transforming obligation into opportunity. Almond milk was another mark of privilege. Imported and costly, it replaced dairy during fasting periods, thickening sauces and enriching broths. While the poor adjusted their diets out of necessity, the elite adapted theirs with luxury. In medieval Paris, what you ate was never accidental. Every ingredient, every spice, every course reflected status, belief, and power. Food was a mirror of society itself, revealing who endured, who prospered, and who ruled. And in a city where bread was life, cuisine became hierarchy made edible. Wine for the wealthy was a carefully chosen pleasure. Stronger, aged, and drawn from prized vineyards, it was served in fine cups and sometimes infused with spices or honey. Drinking was deliberate, ceremonial. Meals unfolded slowly, stretching across hours, accompanied by conversation, music, and ritual. To eat was to perform status. Every gesture at the table signaled refinement, power, and belonging. Yet beneath these sharp divisions, Paris shared a single, unrelenting truth: vulnerability. A poor harvest, a prolonged winter, a disrupted trade route, or a military siege could shatter the city's fragile food supply overnight. Grain prices surged, bakers ran out of flour, bread riots erupted in the streets. Hunger did not respect wealth for long. Even nobles feared scarcity, knowing that abundance was never guaranteed. Food in 13th-century Paris was not a matter of preference or cuisine. It was a measure of survival, status, and access. Bread sustained the city, stew warmed its people, wine kept daily life moving, and every meal, whether eaten from a rough wooden bowl or a gilded platter, reminded Parisians exactly where they stood in a rigid, precarious, and unforgiving social order. In a city forever balancing on the edge of hunger, what you ate was not just nourishment, it was destiny. To eat in medieval Paris was to taste inequality every single day, from the darkest, coarse loaf clutched by a laborer to the spiced roasts laid before noble's table. Food marked status as clearly as clothing or title, drawing invisible lines through every street and household. And yet, hunger was the city's great equalizer. In a crowded, growing metropolis forever vulnerable to shortage, food bound all Parisians together. It shaped their days, weakened or sustained their bodies, and quietly determined their chances of survival. What they ate, or failed to eat, was not merely sustenance. It was a reflection of power, a measure of security, and all too often, the deciding force of their fate.